My name is Julie, I'm married, and today I want to tell you about the day my husband and I were invited by his boss to a party, and at this party I got involved with my husband's boss. Stay until the end, don't miss any details, and leave your like. My husband, Daniel, was as lively as ever. He loved these work get-togethers. His friendship with Richard, his boss, was solid, or at least it seemed to be. I saw him talk about his boss as if he were an almost paternal figure, someone who offered him advice on life and, of course, work. But in truth, there was always something about Richard that struck me differently. He was the kind of man who knew how to dominate the room with just a smile, who had the ability to make anyone feel special. But I somehow knew that there was something more behind that facade of friendliness. "Come on, love. You need to relax a bit. It'll be fun," Daniel told me, as he pulled me into the relaxed atmosphere of the party. I was still hesitant, but I tried to smile and do my best to fit in. After all, it was going to be a long night, and I didn't want to be the wife who stood on the sidelines complaining. So I did what any wife does when she feels out of place. I looked for a group of women to talk to. As Daniel joined the other men, I found myself surrounded by wives and girlfriends who seemed to be more interested in shopping and the latest gossip than in actually interacting. Those etiquette conversations about children, clothes, and the latest reality show weren't exactly my style. I wasn't uncomfortable, but I didn't feel at ease either. So, without much choice, I gradually moved away, observing the men and the mood of the party. Daniel was laughing loudly with his coworkers, a bottle of beer in hand, while Richard, the host, approached me with a calm smile, as if he had noticed my loneliness. He was imposing, but at the same time there was something about him that attracted me without me being able to explain it. It was more than his appearance, with perfectly combed dark hair, a well-tailored suit, and a straight posture. It was the way he looked at people, as if he was always evaluating, always gauging reactions. For some reason, I felt he was watching me more than necessary, as if he was studying me. "Julie, how are you?" he said with that soft tone, but loaded with a confidence that made me swallow. "I'm fine. Thank you, Richard," I replied, trying to keep a smile on my face. "You seem a bit lonely. Would you like to walk around the house? Show you some interesting things?" he asked, with a twinkle in his eye. I didn't know if he was just being polite, or if there was some greater reason for his proposal, but curiosity won out. I couldn't deny that, deep down, I wanted to know more about that man. So, with a smile, I replied, "Sure, I'd love to see more of the house." Richard nodded and gestured with his hand, as if inviting me to follow him. The way into the house seemed almost like a ritual. He guided me through the spacious corridors, with their walls decorated with expensive paintings and imposing furniture. Each room in the house seemed grander than the last, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was entering a world where I had no control. Part of me felt like I was leaving my husband and the others behind, but at the same time, something in me told me that this was something I needed to do. "This house is over 100 years old," Richard commented as we walked down a corridor lit by crystal chandeliers. "It's a family heirloom. Every corner here has a story." I looked around, amazed but also a little intimidated. The antique furniture, the luxurious carpets, everything looked more like a movie set than real life. "It's amazing," I said, trying to hide my feeling of inadequacy. I would never have chosen to live in a place like that, not in my style. But I was there, observing every detail, as if I were being tested by a reality I didn't know. "Come on, I want to show you a more interesting part of the house. Just you and me with no one else around," he suggested, looking back. I hesitated for a moment, but something in the way he said it made me follow. I didn't know what I was waiting for. I didn't know if it was the atmosphere, Richard's natural charm, or something else. But I felt like I was being drawn into something I didn't quite understand. He led me through a few more corridors, and up a wide staircase to the second floor. The place seemed deserted, soundless, almost as if no one used it. There was a door at the end of a corridor, from which a soft, almost seductive light emanated. Richard approached this door and slowly opened it. "This is one of my favorite spaces," he said in a low voice, full of secrecy. "Not many people know it exists." I was curious, not knowing exactly what to expect. When I entered, I was struck by a strange sensation. The room was large, but in a different way, more intimate than the other spaces in the house. The room was decorated with red velvet on the curtains and cushions, and the lighting was soft, with lampshades casting delicate shadows on the walls. In the center, there was a low table, and on it, a series of objects that I didn't immediately recognize: ropes, handcuffs, and other accessories that seemed to come out of a parallel world. I glanced quickly at Richard, who was now standing behind me, watching my reaction. I didn't know what to think. At first, I felt a wave of new feelings. This was different, and I had never seen anything like it in my life, but for some reason, I couldn't take my eyes off those objects. "Were you surprised?" Richard asked with a smile that I didn't know how to interpret. He seemed pleased to see me bewildered, as if he knew something I didn't yet understand. "I've never seen anything like this before," I muttered, feeling the heat rise to my face. It was as if the whole environment was swallowing me up, forcing me to question my own morality. He took a step closer, not in a threatening way, but in such a gentle way that it made me lose control of what I was feeling. There are things in our lives that can awaken desires we never even imagined existed. Sometimes the most unusual attracts us. I didn't know what to say. There was something in his words, in his way of speaking, that made me uneasy and intrigued at the same time. Richard took another step closer to me, as if he were offering me an experience I had never had before, but at the same time felt I should explore. I was alone with him in an unknown place, far from my husband, far from the normality of my life. "If you want, I can show you more. It's up to you," he said, and his voice sounded like a whisper in my ear, inviting but without pressure. I was torn between fear and curiosity. Part of me wanted to get out of there and go back to the party, where things seemed safer and more familiar. But another part of me, a part I barely recognized, wanted to know what else Richard had to offer. That night, somehow, had only just begun, and it had already started to change everything. The air in the room was thick with the soft smell of leather. The soft light emanating from small lamps scattered around the walls created delicate shadows that danced across the antique furniture. With every step, I felt like I was entering a space that was not only unknown, but also secret, as if that environment was reserved for a chosen few, and I inexplicably felt privileged to be there. Richard closed the door behind us, and the soft sound of the lock was like a reminder that we were completely alone. The feeling of exclusivity and privacy was intoxicating, as if everything else in the world was suspended at that moment. When he led me to the center of the room, my eyes didn't know where to look first. The walls were adorned with rich tapestries, and the low table in the center was covered with a variety of objects that I couldn't identify, but which fascinated me at the same time. Handcuffs, ropes, candles, and other utensils that, until then, had only been in movies, were there, in front of me, in a unique and objective way. "This room," Richard began to say, his voice soft, almost as if he were sharing a secret. "It's where people stop being just who they are. Here, people become what they really want to be. Have you ever asked yourself what you really want, Julie? If you're enjoying this story and can't imagine what's going to happen at the end, leave a like and don't miss any of the details." I looked at him without knowing what to say. My mind was a mixture of confusion and curiosity. What did he mean by that? What did he expect me to say? But at the same time, something inside me was beginning to understand. It wasn't just the atmosphere that attracted me. It was the way he spoke, as if he already knew the thoughts that were brewing in my mind and was guiding me towards a hidden desire that I didn't even know existed. "I've never thought about it, Richard," I replied, my voice a little shaky. I was beginning to realize that there, in that room, I no longer needed to hide anything. Richard's words were breaking down the barriers I had created for myself over the years. He spoke with a calmness that made me believe he knew what he was doing, that he knew how to take me beyond my own limitations. He smiled slightly, as if he already knew the answer I hadn't said out loud. "Many people never allow themselves to feel what you're starting to feel now, but there's nothing wrong with that. There's no shame in giving yourself over to what's deepest. Sometimes what we desire is stronger than ourselves." The tone of his voice was enigmatic, and a rush of warmth ran up my spine. He wasn't talking about something vulgar or crude. He was talking about a freedom to allow oneself, to explore what I had repressed for so long. I'd never thought of it like that before, but now it all seemed so natural. Richard stepped forward, interrupting my thoughts, and touched me gently on the shoulder. The touch was gentle, but with a firmness that made me stop breathing for a moment. He hadn't asked permission, but somehow at that moment there was no need to ask. His mere presence was making me question what I had always considered right or wrong. "Are you afraid to explore your own desires, Julie?" he asked, his eyes fixed on mine, penetrating every one of my defenses. I felt a wave of heat run through my body. It wasn't just physical attraction. It was something deeper. Something that came from the way he could read my thoughts, as if he knew exactly what I was feeling. Something inside me said goodbye to all conventions and gradually surrendered to that place, to that sensation, to him, the desire to know more, to feel more, to experience something that until then had only been a distant idea, became an urgency. "No, I'm not afraid," I said, and my voice sounded firmer than I felt. Something inside me had awakened, and now I knew there was no turning back. Whatever happened from then on, I wanted to live it. I wanted to explore that desire that was growing inside me with every word Richard said, with every intense look he gave me. He smiled again, and this time, the smile was wider, as if he had won a silent battle. "I knew you weren't afraid, Julie. Now you're going to learn what it means to really give yourself up." He guided me to the table in the center of the room, and suddenly, the objects on it no longer seemed so strange. On the contrary, they looked inviting, as if they were waiting for me, ready to show me something I hadn't even imagined I wanted. Richard picked up one of the handcuffs, with a gentle, almost caressing touch, and looked at me, waiting for my reaction. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice filled with a kind of certainty that made me shudder. I didn't know how to answer. What did it mean to be ready? I knew what I wanted, but I was afraid of how it could change everything. But something inside me, something deep, answered for me. I simply nodded. No words, no more hesitation. I was ready. I wanted more. Richard then put the handcuffs on me, and when he adjusted the clasp, I felt a strange, but at the same time comforting sensation. It wasn't uncomfortable. On the contrary, it felt natural, as if I was giving myself over to something bigger than myself, something that had been repressed until then, but which now seemed to be part of me, part of my essence. "Do you know what that means, Julie?" he asked, his voice low and laden with meaning. I looked at him, my eyes shining with a mixture of desire and curiosity that I had never experienced before. I didn't know exactly what he meant, but I knew what I felt. I didn't want to go back anymore. I didn't want to hide that part of me any longer. "Yes," I replied, my voice firm and calm, even though my heart was racing. I wanted to continue. I wanted to find out what else he had to offer me, what else this room, and he, had to show me. Something deep inside me knew that this was a unique opportunity. I was beginning to understand what he meant. I was no longer here by chance. I was there because I wanted to be. I wanted to discover my limits, but more importantly, I wanted to go beyond them. Richard, now completely close to me, smiled again and took a step back. He watched my every move, my every reaction. I felt like I was the center of his attention, but at the same time, somehow, I felt free. Free to be who I really was. "Now, let's get started," he murmured. I didn't know what to expect, but I knew that this was just the beginning of something that would change me in ways I couldn't have predicted. The desire was in me. It was stronger than me. And contrary to what I imagined, I wasn't afraid. I was ready to lose myself in that new world that was opening up before me. The room was immersed in a deep stillness, but there was something in the air, a tension that seemed to grow with every breath. The soft light from the lamps drew shadows on the walls, creating an intimate atmosphere that was at the same time full of anticipation. Richard moved with an almost calculated calm, as if he were in control of everything, but in no hurry, savoring every moment. I watched him, my eyes fixed on him, feeling something inside me open up, an uncontrollable curiosity. He moved closer, and again, the sensation of his presence dominated everything around me. His eyes were locked on mine, as if they knew exactly what I was thinking. I didn't know how, but I felt that he understood me in a way that no one else could. Every second in there, something in me crumbled. My barriers, my resistances, dissolved under the pressure of that gaze. "Julie," he said, his voice soft but loaded with authority. "Are you giving in?" The words were more of a statement than a question. I felt the answer welling up inside me without much thought. Yes, I was giving in. Every second in the room felt like a new revelation, and the more he said it, the more I wanted to lose myself in it. Yes, I answered, and the simple fact of admitting it to myself was like a relief. I no longer needed to hide anything. Whatever was happening, I was ready to live. He smiled, and not just any smile, but a smile that knew something I still didn't fully understand. With a gentle gesture, he took my hand and led it to the table where objects were laid out, as if they were pieces in a game I was about to learn to play. "Let's go beyond what you know," he said, running his fingers along a thin rope. "Don't be afraid. Here you can be whoever you want." I knew he was right. There was no more room for doubt or fear. Desire had taken hold inside me, and now I didn't want to go back. I wanted to explore, to feel, to experience. And that was something that, until that moment, I had never known I needed. Then he began, and when he had finished, he looked at me again, and his eyes were charged with something I didn't know how to describe, but which left me feeling vulnerable and empowered at the same time. "Now you're ready for the next step," he murmured. I didn't have to answer. I knew I was ready. There were no more questions, just a growing desire to explore what Richard wanted to show me, what this new world had to offer. The fear had disappeared, replaced by an unusual sense of freedom. It wasn't about losing control. It was about surrendering to something greater, something I wanted to feel, to live, to experience. "Let yourself go, Julie," he whispered, and his voice was like an order, but at the same time like a promise that everything I felt there would be more than I could imagine. We moved closer without hesitation. I knew that at that moment, all I had to do was give myself over completely. There was no more to hide, and I didn't want to hide anything. I wanted to feel it. I wanted to live that moment to the end, with no regrets, in no hurry. "I'm ready," I murmured, and I felt the energy in the air change, as if the whole space was waiting for me. Richard smiled again, and with that, the game really began. It had been 40 minutes since we were there. Richard and I had already relieved ourselves in an inexplicable way, so he helped me untie the ropes, and I felt a wave of calm. What we had done was still in me as a form of adrenaline, but somehow the anxiety and fear had disappeared. I was different, and, although I didn't know exactly how, I was at peace with it. He looked at me, and for a moment it seemed as if he knew exactly what was going on in my mind. "Ready to go back? Your husband must be looking for you," he asked, his voice soft but firm. "Let's go back, but I'm sure he's drunk by now," I replied, feeling that it was true. I didn't want to hesitate any longer. I didn't know what would become of me after that night, but I knew that, at that moment, I had found something new inside me. We went downstairs and back to the party. The sound of the music, the conversations, and the laughter were the same. But for me, everything seemed distant. Daniel was there, smiling and drinking with the others, and I looked at him for a moment, but something inside me had changed. He was no longer the same to me. Richard stood next to me, as calm as before, as if nothing had happened. I watched him, and something in my chest tightened. He knew what had happened, and somehow that made me feel more alive, more aware of myself. I went over to Daniel, kissed him on the cheek as if it were the most natural thing in the world, and joined the others. But something in me, a silent flame, was still burning. Richard didn't say anything else, but his gaze met mine for a moment. It was enough. He knew, and so did I. What had happened in the bedroom was something that only the two of us shared. The party continued around us, but I was distant. I knew I was different now, and I didn't care. Not anymore. That's what happened, my loves. What did you think? Let us know in the comments. And if you liked it, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel by activating the notification bell so you don't miss any videos.